All right, it's 1 minute after, and since this is being recorded, I feel like we can go ahead and get started. Leave a lot of room for questions and stuff at the end. So welcome everyone. I'm excited to be here at BlinkOn 16, present a little bit about some of the work that Ian and I and some friends have been up to on bringing multi-line formatted text to Canvas. So my name is Travis Leithead. I'm a product manager now on the Microsoft Edge team. And Ian joins me.
Hello.
We're going to team present this thing together. All right. So let me give a little bit of context to the problem statement that this feature is designed to solve. First of all, in Canvas applications, it's actually pretty difficult to work with multiple lines of text today. In the platform, there's already some text facilities, but they're pretty limited. For example, you can write essentially one line of text given the Canvas's current state with fill text or stroke text API, and that'll just draw it. You can also put that same string of text into measure text, and that's going to give you some basic metrics about the font and width and height, which are primarily important for authors to be able to position that line of text, specifically in the canvas itself. But outside of that, if you want to do anything that involves multiple lines, or say you're making an editor of some kind, or just wanting to position a nice paragraph of text in a space, it becomes a bit more challenging to do that because you have to figure out where your line breaks are, and you also don't have much in the way of styling particular spans of that text. For example, if you wanted to bold something or highlight something or underline something, you have to kind of chunk it up into parts. It gets quite a bit more complicated very quickly. But also in HTML, in the DOM itself, we don't have a lot of metrics for getting information about, a paragraph of text itself. We can kind of go into the DOM and look at text nodes, and that just gets us down to a string at some point. And that's almost all we get. There's a couple layout-based APIs that will tell us some boxes. But other than that, it's pretty sparse. So that's one of the other problems we're looking at. And finally, text is kind of hard. On the surface, it seems maybe fairly trivial because you've got, I'm kind of coming from an English language speaking perspective, but I mean, how hard is it? You break on spaces and you're done, right? But it starts to get a little bit trickier as you get into more complex languages where word breaking isn't as obvious, or there are particular rules in the context of that language, such as tie. Not to mention working with bidirectional text when it's mixed in, perhaps left to right and right to left text all together. And then there's ligatures that can completely change glyphs and characters, and you got to know when to break around those. So it gets kind of tricky. So what we wanted to do when we set out is make working with multi-line text as easy for web authors as possible. And one of the obvious things to do there is, hey, authors, instead of having to write your own line breaking and text shaping implementations in JavaScript, we already have this really great text engine in the layout of the browser, in the layout engine. And so let's just see if we can't leverage that to allow you to get that same power and flexibility in Canvas. We also want to support some of the newer scenarios that are coming up as very advanced applications are starting to move to Canvas for various reasons, such as text editors. And many of those editors are, of course, writing their own implementations, and it gets very tricky, as we talked about. So we want to enable that, kind of lower the barrier of entry for those types of scenarios. So we want to offer some of the features kind of at a primitive level that allows web authors to position the caret, for example, and handle hit testing. When you click on a paragraph, you're going to put a caret in somewhere, handle selection, highlighting, rendering, that kind of thing. We want to be able to do this on a worker also, where there is no DOM, for example. We think there are some really interesting scenarios that authors can leverage when they're working in parallel on a separate thread. They'd like to perhaps still be able to work with text and get metrics out and do some logic there without needing to block the main thread. As far as guidelines go, we want to use kind of infrastructure and concepts that are very familiar. So we're reusing CSS as the styling language for expressing how to format, how to constrain, how to lay out the text, so that you transfer your skills basically from HTML right into this feature without needing to learn a lot more. And we wanted to keep the model for this new feature fairly simple and familiar. So using arrays of text that basically act as spans that you can then apply styling onto to style it. Specifically for a non-goal, we're trying to avoid getting into the rabbit hole of exposing glyphs and glyph information, because that can be even more tricky than all the stuff we talked about so far, especially when you have ligatures involved and some fonts that support some feature settings. The mapping between the source text that you start with and the glyphs that you see on screen, the specific glyphs that come out of the fonts, is kind of a many-to-many relationship. It gets awfully tricky, and we feel like we don't, in many scenarios, you as a web author don't actually need to know specifically what glyph it is. You just mainly need to know where positions are that you could logically, say, put a caret or highlight, and maybe the dimensions and sizes of things like that. But we're trying to avoid getting into that rabbit hole. We recognize that there may be some scenarios where like glyph level information is useful, and so we're setting that aside for now, at least, and we'll maybe look at that in a second iteration. Okay, so this is a snapshot of kind of what the API looks like to format a paragraph. So it's a fairly straightforward API. It involves a call to a format function with essentially 3 parameters. The first is a set of text runs that can include styling on a particular run. So here the text is, "The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog," with the word brown sort of bolded and colored in brown. The second parameter is kind of an overall styling. So this is where you would set, say, the overall font size and that you want the entire thing to be italic. And then the final parameter is the constraint on the inline size. So I'd like to constrain this thing to 285 pixels in the inline direction. And so then you see kind of a preview of what the result would be on the right, where it wraps. So once you call format, what you get back is a paragraph metrics object, an object that includes information about the overall size of that text, includes the separate lines that were where they were broken and how big they are size-wise, their position relative to the paragraph, and APIs for being able to relate those lines and their dimensions back to the source text. So in the explainer, we are also planning on, but have not quite yet landed, changes for introducing some additional capabilities into that paragraph metrics, such as getting a caret position, say from a 2D point or from the input text. That should support some basic hit testing cases for editors that we mentioned earlier. So now you've got this paragraph metrics, you can inspect it and get all that information out of it, which is useful on its own. You may want to take it a step further and then just draw it to a canvas. And so there's a draw formatted text that lets you just position that where you want it. And then the the results get drawn in. So there are lots of cases where that's super useful and easy, and you just want to render an entire paragraph at a time. But there are some other more complex cases where it may be useful to just work a single line at a time, and you want to perhaps be able to adjust line breaking dimensions as you go. So a couple of cases that we're showing here are maybe you've got some obstruction in your text scene that you need to wrap text around. So you might put some text in, and then you need to kind of reserve or artificially break your sentences around certain obstructions. In another case, maybe in like a CSS regions style approach, you want to flow your text from different regions, different shapes, and kind of have it continually flow through. And so the API supports a different mode, which is rendering lines at a time. And we've kept the shape of the API as similar as possible to the previous one. So the only thing that's changed here is a new function called lines. And from that, you get out a, instead of a metrics object, you're going to get an iterator out of that. And using the iterator, you can then get a line, the first line, and then that line includes, its position information, and you can then put it where you want to put it. And you can adjust the iterator as you go to say, further constrain or expand the inline size that you'd like to have. So these lines don't include any sort of overarching paragraph object. Since you've elected to look at lines themselves, you're kind of on your own for positioning them on the canvas, and there is no sort of paragraph level APIs like there were in the format call. So those metrics are interesting and useful. They're going to have a lot of the same APIs that will be available on the paragraphs for these lines. And then, of course, you can render a line very similarly to how you did it with a paragraph.
All right. I can speak to the current implementation status. We do have a partial implementation of the API. It is an earlier iteration of the API. So if you looked at the explainer today and then looked at the implementation, they don't match at all. The current implementation is much more imperative, whereas the explainer's API is much more declarative. So in the one we've implemented, you have to create canvas formatted text objects and then add runs to those objects. And for each run, you have to add styles. So that will all go away, but it does sort of serve as a proof of concept. We can do this. Also, the existing API is render only. It doesn't expose any of the metrics objects just yet. But with that, I can give a quick running code demo. If I can share my other window. There we go. So this is just a canary build of Chromium. I do have the enable Blink features canvas formatted text turned on. But other than that, this is all available in Canary. I will note that even though it looks in the text editors here that I am using the same format that we showed in the slides, behind the scenes I am converting it to that imperative model. So yeah, in this case, we've got a simple text string. This is the kind of thing you might want to wrap. This looks pretty easy, right? It's monospaced font. Even you could break this yourself pretty easily. But if you switch fonts, obviously it starts to get a little more complicated. You actually have to measure the size of each word, and more fonts. Oops. Different fonts will obviously make that a lot harder. But let's try something a little more complicated. So here is the quick brown fox, brown being actually made brown and bolded. Again, you could still do this yourself. It's still English. It's still the font size is the same. You'd have to modify your context styles when you hit brown in order to measure the size of the bolded text, but it wouldn't be that hard. Similarly, we can change the size instead of bolding it. This does expose one of the bugs we have right now with text baseline, but you can change the size. But English is pretty easy, really. Where things get fun is when you have complicated Unicode BiDi text or other foreign languages. I mean, I don't even know the rules that are being followed here, and thankfully I don't have to, because the layout engine does this all for us. Like an English speaker cannot look at this and sort of figure out how even on the English parts, in this case, the parentheses are right around Unicode conference, like you would see in an English text, and here they're sort of different. Yeah, that's not the kind of thing you want to have to write yourself in JavaScript. So with that, we can probably close this down and we'll go back to the slide deck.
Thanks, Ian. That was awesome. It's super fun to see that working in action. We have a few things we are going to be doing right away. Like I mentioned before, there are some additional updates to the explainer that we'd like to make to support some of these editor use cases. So being able to put a caret in place and manipulate that using the arrow keys on the keyboard to accurately figure out where that caret should move to, positioned on the screen. To draw selection rectangles, you need to have a little bit more information in the metrics to do some of those operations. So we'll be bringing those to the explainer soon. We also would love to introduce support for inline block content, meaning reserving space within, say, a flow of text in a paragraph for some whatever you want, essentially, some content that's just moves with the text inline. And then in the long term, we'd really like to be able to integrate some of the metrics that are coming out of this explainer and feature into other parts of the platform for consistency and to bring kind of that next level of information into other areas. So in the DOM, say if you had a div or a paragraph element that was mostly just containing text, it'd be great to be able to get those same set of text metrics that could be useful for specific scenarios in the DOM. Also in the Houdini layout API, which is a CSS feature that allows you to write your own layout algorithm in JavaScript. There are blocks that you get that are essentially inline block content. And in order to position and set those up correctly, it would also be useful to get metrics of this flavor. So we'd like to make sure we can integrate into those couple of places. I think with that, we'd like to open it up to questions, comments, and feedback. And let's see, there's been some activity on the chat, but if anyone wants to pop in and voice a question, that's cool too.
I was just going to mention one thing that Travis mentioned about the glyphs and supporting glyphs. I think it's more than that, right? I mean, yes, we're not exposing glyphs, but we also made a conscious decision of focusing on the use cases of text as opposed to text as art a little bit, which is sort of the idea that like if you don't have the glyph path and you want to do some cute stuff with that, like we purposefully decided to not look into that right now, right? And draw that line and say, okay, we're talking about text as passing information in a series of lines. Let's tackle those use cases right now. So that's one thing.
I see a question around accessibility in the chat from Jeffrey. How does this interact with accessibility? Can you make it accessible automatically somehow? This is a great question, one that we've been thinking a lot about. If we do nothing, the accessibility is not great. It's still kind of the base level of accessibility that's available to Canvas, which is you want to take your text, and put it into like a shadow or a fallback DOM for the Canvas, which allows screen readers to pick it up. But I think there are opportunities here, given we'll have some kind of a metrics object that contains the layout, that possibly we can think about how to hook that up into the accessibility tree as well. I think that would be very helpful and useful. So we'll be thinking about it. As you have ideas or suggestions, we'd love to capture those in the issues or comments. Another question, are you measuring or can you measure whether people using this API are also remembering to expose their user interface to the accessibility tree? Ooh, good question.
So
Fernando?
I know the answer, that which is kind of no. So we are looking into a much better accessibility API in general. It's not there yet, but there's some good efforts. And when those things get launched or at least spec'd properly, we will be able to start measuring things like how many canvases are using those accessibility. So in that case, we will be able to. Right now, there's no such a thing, so we don't.
Thank you, Fernando. Ken says, I'm very excited. Thank you, Ken. Yeah, we're looking forward to this too. There's a companion bit of work happening in the editing working group around edit context. So this is sort of leveraging the power of the browser's native editing capabilities to allow you to intercept and work with the text in the way that it exposes it out to various tools like the input method editors, the IMEs. So I think in combination with kind of that low-level editing part plus something like formatted text where you can now take that and display it in a really great way, you've got a really good pairing of features there. So anyway, those are two things I'm very excited about.
This is cool. I got a question for you, if I may.
Please.
I'm just trying to picture the kind of the progression, like fast forward 5 years or something, and just put your X tag member hat on, I guess, Travis. And is this? Are we heading down a path that lets us expose more and more of the layout engine to Canvas? And like, are we right now? App developers have to choose between either this very Canvas-based design or this very DOM-based design. Do you see that blurring long term? And can we do that in a way that's not going to add huge amounts of complexity to the platform? So, for example, one specific question is, can you write a conformance test for this that relies on pixel tests that verify that DOM rendering and Canvas rendering of text are actually pixel identical?
That actually is how the tests are running right now. There's a pixel test that basically uses a regular HTML file as its baseline expectations. So yes, I guess.
And relative to the meta question about like where is this going down the road, that is certainly a discussion that has come up once or twice, and it's interesting to think about because you've got several speculative incubation proposals, especially in the Houdini working group around, what do all of the layout boxes look like, the box tree, for example, and if you're going to be able to describe that, this could be, maybe this fits into that picture where this is the model for, a block that happens to contain inline text of some form. Hard to predict the future. But I think that if we if we're conscious about these kinds of things, and when we continue to explore what the scenarios are that customers need, and if it looks like they're needing more and more of that overall picture, I'd like to ensure that we keep things as consistently similar as possible. So that you could perhaps, in fact, have a reflection of a DOM that you could then operate on in a worker. And maybe that's the way to bring DOM into workers. That, that's always been kind of a problem in the past. Well, it's a current problem. So yeah, not really a great answer, but
that's helpful, thanks. So maybe one concrete example of a next step. So say somebody's rendering a bunch of text, now they want to have a link in that text. Like, what do you imagine next steps are there? Like, is there, do you imagine a path for saying, well, you provide a block of DOM instead of just strings?
For the link, I guess it depends on how much interactivity you want to be automatically provided. So with the set of upcoming features we have planned to land in the explainer, it should be pretty easy for you to calculate when, say, the mouse position is over the link, or what you painted to look like a link. And you could then sort of configure the cursor to look like a pointer. And
you got to remember to update the status bar. And you want right click, open a new tab, and save link. You want all that context menu to work.
Still a lot of work for the author to do, yeah, for sure.
So,
but this isn't a new problem for canvas-based applications.
Yeah.
Like, people draw like images and like text to canvases all the time, and like if they want that functionality, they can. So, yeah, it is. Canvas is a low-level API.
And technically, right now, you are able to render HTML in a canvas through SVG, even though you should not do that ever. Because in theory, you can include a foreign object on SVG, which is an HTML, and you can render the SVG on canvas, and that would technically work. We did have conversations about like just rendering it, like DOM nodes and like as draw image, and it works. It's just that, like, it's what you said, right? Like, it's not only the rendering part. Like, we are focusing on allowing some sort of rendering of text because text is hard, and I think that's a reasonable thing. We haven't stopped to look into, okay, let's completely let's provide a full JavaScript API for layout and like for allow you to do a browser inside the browser. Like we have. That's not the direction that maybe we're making a mistake, and then eventually this is gonna land to this, and it's gonna be very sad. But like, I don't think that's necessarily what we are getting towards here. Like,
yeah. I mean, the core thing of this API is really that, like, pretty much anyone who tries to write a text layout engine will get it wrong. In like 1,000 different ways. There's really only, a handful of high quality text layout engines that exist, and like all the browsers have one, and then a few like word editing software have them. So it's specifically trying to allow people just to hook into the text layout engine basically.
All right. Ian, you want to get our last slide up? And I think we're just about at time. So I want to make sure that everyone hears a call to action. We'd love to continue to get your feedback. This work is happening in the public, in the WICG. Go ahead and subscribe to the issue list there. Read through the set of issues that we've got. Love your comments on them. As new things come up, please file them. There's a link to our current explainer. In the WICG, we will be announcing community meetings through the issues list as they come up. And we want to call out special thanks to Sushant, who worked on the initial implementation and idea for this feature. And of course, our friends who are joining me on the call, Ian and both Ians, and Fernando, and to Daniel Libby, who's been helping with reviews and feedbacks. And thanks to all of you for attending. Really appreciate your time.